Let me see if y'all gave me any donations. Let me see.
Whoa. We can't play Umar the day after.
Last donation to the school was Richard Harris.
The day after MLK Day. We can't do that. Peace. I am Philip Roundtree, and you are tuned into the January 17th post Martin Luther King Day edition of Rhetorically Speaking. Props to those of you who are watching on Instagram. Make sure you go over to YouTube so you can watch. You get the whole viewing experience. It looks much nicer on these parts. And always hit the subscribe button. Same goes for Facebook people, but I'll give y'all a little leeway, right? If you hit that share button, just so other folk can come in. This isn't a one-sided conversation, no matter what the title of the show is, right? Rhetorically speaking, I'm not speaking to myself. I'm speaking to the people. So if you hit the share button, I'll forgive you for not being over there on YouTube. Straight like that. And last but certainly not least, I appreciate those who are watching on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed, if you just saw the flyer, you're like, let me see what this boy talking about. Please hit that subscribe button. Not that I'm going to get anything out of it, but it makes me feel good to see that number go up, right? So I can't be playing Umar on the day after the Martin Luther King Day, the return of the King. I don't know if you watched that Boondocks episode. This might be year 3 that I've stopped playing that clip of Dr. King coming back to a whole bunch of ruckus and bull jive. But I feel like if Dr. King was to come back, no, I'm not gonna say no. Martin Luther, he not doing that. He not doing how they portrayed him in the Boondocks. But I do think he would sit there and look at mofos like, is this what we doing? Could you imagine that? Could you imagine Dr. King like being on the Shade Room? Dr. King having like a Instagram. We saw what they did to Al Sharpton, right? Al took the picture. And again, Al's up there too. Al one of them. He one of them ones, right? Like historically speaking, no matter how you feel about him today. And that's a separate conversation we can have about there's no retirement plans for activists. So for those who are like, yo, you like Jay's, your man Billionaire Jay, Al Sharpton in the mirror taking selfies. How they supposed to save him? You know what I mean? I probably butchered the line, but you get what I'm putting down, right? So picturing Dr. King with the phone in the mirror, like, yo, what up, y'all? How's it going down? It's the King. I don't know. Maybe he probably wouldn't be on here. I don't see him being on that type time. He probably would be out here again doing the same thing he was doing, right? Trying to free us, trying to save us from ourselves. And so, with that being said, I want to get to the point of the show. I don't plan on being here too long, but I wanted to have a conversation on Martin Luther King, right? Not necessarily a specific aspect of Martin Luther King, where we're talking about the radical Dr. King, not the whitewashed version that gets celebrated, right? But the one who was radical, who was public enemy number one. I'm not necessarily here for that conversation. I'm here for a conversation that was spawned by a comment, a post, a story on social media, right? But before I get there, I just want to reflect and offer my feelings and sentiments on Dr. King. It's a hell of an individual, right? That's all I got. He's a hell of an individual. I'm not going to sit here and trying to intellectualize the work of Dr. King, which I can do, right? Maybe not to the extent of others, but I feel like, he's just a hell of a person. especially knowing what we know now when we see FBI files, when we see how white folk are trying to embrace him when they literally wanted to kill him, or conversely, have him die by suicide. I'm going to say, listen, a hell of a human being from what I know of him, right? I got to make sure I say that. From what I know of him, a hell of a human being. And so on the day yesterday where we center his contributions to humanity, a question came up, right? Should we also be acknowledging his perceived flaws? And so if the day is earmarked to celebrate his advocacy, his determination, his fervent pushback against white supremacy and capitalism, should we highlight his exhibition of patriarchal privilege through infidelity? And so some of you may be here looking for answers. I ain't got the answer, Sway. All I have is a perspective. I have my perspective, which you may feel I'm not necessarily taking aside, but ultimately it's my truth. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to post the story that triggered this conversation for tonight. And so the good brother Mark Lamont Hill had several amazing posts, and I hate giving people credit. You know what I mean? He got poor taste in music, but he could write his ass off. I'll give him that, right? But he said, today, let us remember Martin Luther King as he was, a black radical, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, revolutionary, Christian internationalist who was deemed an enemy of the state and assassinated for his radical work. Just about everything else is a lie. And so I, like hundreds, I'm sure thousands of people, reposted that to their story. It may have been a topic of conversation for some, but I thought it was that important to post on my page. And for those of you who follow me, now I rarely post other people's stuff. I rarely post other people's stuff. A lot of it is just my thoughts, and I thank you all for engaging me, those of you who opt to, right? I know following me is interesting. It's a labor of love for some. But be clear, I don't do it for controversy. I do it to spark critical thought. Hence the reason why I have this show right here, Rhetorically Speaking. And so what would really spark this conversation tonight, I would just happen to be in the stories, and I'm never in people's stories. I rarely like people's posts. I may do it out of obligation. I feel, an obligatory aspect to double tap on some folk. But I saw in a story a sister had wrote, he also cheated repeatedly on Coretta with a slew of white women. I respect the work of this ancestor, and I know that many of our black men revolutionaries, in quotation marks, were the least revolutionary in their own homes and towards black women. So we take a minute to to digest that, right? Because I had to take a minute to digest it when I saw it. I had a visceral response, which was, like many who I saw when I posted this on my main page today, to get your comments, get your thoughts. Why now? That was my visceral reaction. We gotta do this now? Why can't we allow the celebration of this amazing human being, yes, who may have quote unquote flaws, right? Who may have had a blind spot or two. Why must we address that now, in a day when we're supposed to celebrate him? That's the whole point of the day, to celebrate his contributions to humanity. But in Phil fashion, I allowed that thought to sit for a minute. And then I had to think about it from other perspectives. I had to think about it from the lens of, and what helped me see another perspective was I thought about the late great basketball player Kobe Bean Bryant, because that's the only aspect that I know of him. I know of him as a basketball player, and how upon his death we see people like Gayle King, who was vilified for bringing up what happened in Utah. I was on local Philly radio at the time. I brought up what happened in Utah as tastefully as possible. And that was one of the point of contentions when it came to Gayle King. That it was tasteless. And so when I sat and thought about how I spoke about Kobe Bryant and understood why Gayle brought it up, right? I have no formal media training, no formal journalistic training. I'm a social worker by trade. I'm a therapist by trade. And with that said, when you're talking about people and you're interacting with people, it's important that we be mindful not only about how we talk about them, but how we talk with them. We have to be mindful of the language that we use in the discussions that we're having. It's one of the reasons why Skip Bayless, who has no social capital, why folk called for his head when he made very real comments about the NFL, them canceling football games in the aftermath of Damar Hamlin's injury. Because he hasn't earned that. And some may feel that Gayle hadn't earned that right. For me, I don't know if I earned that right. I was on radio for 3 hours. I needed to have a conversation. And I like to have full conversations. And so when we're having full conversations and we're talking about somebody's legacy, it's not going to be all rosy. It's not going to be picture perfect. Right? And so, yes, a part of Kobe's legacy is what took place in Utah. And I tried to come at it from a perspective of it's an amazing comeback story. Whatever that's worth. I even feel nasty in saying that because, again, we're having a conversation about sexual assault and I'm talking about an amazing comeback story of an individual. Right? But again, these are the things that we have to be mindful of when we're having this conversation. And having conversations that could be triggering for individuals. How Kobe Bean Bryant may have lost it all. He lost endorsements. He almost lost his family. And so one could say that was a tipping point for the man, Kobe Bean Bryant. And so how do we gloss over that when that could have been the impetus for change for Kobe Bean Bryant? And so on one end, you have Gayle King, which in hindsight, I don't know why you're asking Lisa Leslie this. I could see if you're reporting on it and you wanted to bring it up, like Bomani Jones and Pablo Torre the day after, who handled it in an amazingly professional, non-triggering way. And so bringing that back to Dr. King, once I sat and reminded of how I responded to that, and I started thinking about why it might be brought up, I completely understood. I completely understood why it was brought up. And helping me with that was the good brother Akil Parker of All This Math. He made a post on Facebook that said, and I'm summarizing, paraphrasing, The same thing we say Black History Month, celebrate Black History 365. But he went a step further. And he said one day out of 365 days is 0.3% of the year that we're only discussing on a state-sanctioned holiday. Percentages help us put things into perspective. And so with that being said, much like Kobe, for him, there will be no bigger day, God bless the dead, than the day that he died. We're not talking about Kobe now. And so it would be no reason for us to talk about Utah. Much like Dr. King. We're not necessarily celebrating Dr. King from a global perspective, from a national perspective, 365 days a year. As black folk, we probably should. But no, we're doing it when they do it, many of us. And so we feel, because of the lack of conversation that takes place throughout the year, we feel compelled to put someone's legacy on blast in that 24-hour span. Because if we don't talk about it then, when will we talk about it? It's much like Damar Hamlin. I got a lot of pushback when I was having conversation about Damar Hamlin and not even necessarily Damar Hamlin, but the dangers of football. And people are saying, why now? Because this is on the main stage. Much like when there's a mass shooting, what happens? Conversations on gun reform come to the forefront. And so for some folk, for reasons I don't know, I'm not going to pretend to understand, feel compelled to bring up the less than savory aspects of Dr. King's life. With the sister that I was discussing, whose Instagram story I posted, his infidelity. And then relating that to the bigger picture of how black women were treated by their male counterparts during this time and now, right? This hasn't changed. Look no further than Meg the Stallion being shot and people taken up for a shooter. And so my thoughts on it, I get both sides. For me, yesterday, I choose to celebrate his contributions to society. Right? The sacrifices that he made on behalf of the people. Now, not lost upon me as I learn more about Dr. King throughout the rest of the 364 days that he's navigated depression and anxiety, right? I don't know if we're necessarily bringing that up on MLK Day. Because why? We want to highlight the aspect, the healthy, the positive aspects of him. I'll maybe understand his fidelity or lack thereof, which might come from reading, might come from listening to others speak. But in reality, it's not for me to cast judgment. I do recognize that he's flawed. I'm not holding him up there as a deity. He was a man with a purpose, who did the best that he can with what he had, and then some. And so for me, there are aspects of him that we should all strive for. Conversely, much like any parent who's raising a child, and you may have conversations about, and I hate to quote the billionaire capitalist Jay-Z, but Hove did that. So hopefully you will have to go through that. Hopefully we see what the quote unquote perceived flaws were and how maybe managing and navigating so much could potentially influence how you show up in your romantic relationships, in your familial relationships. Hopefully, Dr. King is an exemplar in all areas. So that's my spiel. And again, I told you wasn't going to get either way, right? Because I understand both. I understand why people do it, right? I had a poll up asking that very question. Should we only celebrate the healthy, positive aspects of Dr. King, or conversely, should we discuss his flaws as well? And it was split down the middle, 50-50. But I think what's important is to recognize the humanity. What's important is to recognize his desire to free us. I always ask myself that Sonia Sanchez question, how does it free us? And so personally, when I sit and think about Dr. King's infidelity and how it frees us, maybe it forces us to look at our relationships a little bit more, a little bit deeper. Be a little bit more transparent. Be a little bit more honest, which maybe benefits the collective, because we understand how his other works may free us. But for me personally, infidelity doesn't sully the legacy that is Dr. King. And that's not necessarily for me to even comment on. That's for his family, right? That's something for them to have to reconcile afterwards. He doesn't get an opportunity to help them process harm that may have been caused by that. And so maybe I feel part of me feels that it's irresponsible, maybe hurtful, to bring it up in the context of he cheated on Coretta with white women. Yeah, that's a part of his legacy. That's something that his family has to grapple with. Now, when we talk about revolutionary black men in their relationship to black women, now that's a conversation that I'm here for, that I feel more comfortable in having conversation about. Because I don't have to forgive Dr. King. That's not my role of responsibility. But understanding as somebody who considers themselves I'm not going to even say thought leader, right? I don't even know what that is at this stage of the game. But somebody who likes to have critical conversations, I have to recognize how I'm showing up in all rooms. I have to understand the impact of race, of gender, of identity, in the role that plays. I have to recognize my privilege. And so I don't need to get into the specifics of what Dr. King or anybody else did. You can give me the cliff notes, the overarching points. What it means to show up as a healthy and whole human being on behalf of community. while still recognizing that I'm fallible, that nobody's walking the earth's surface is perfect. I done quoted enough of that guy for the night. Trust me. And so those are my thoughts. All right, those are my thoughts. It's not much by way of in the chat. I see Kion in here. Says that's exactly why I think we need to talk about him in totality. Men who want to be or are called to be leaders and freedom fighters, we need to know so we can actually consider protecting our relationships like we do our community. And so again, it depends how you opt to look at it, right? What aspects of an individual do you decide to look at when you're, considering their effectiveness as a leader, right? I was having this conversation in class today, right? Like we're talking about, are we able to separate the artist from the individual? Should we be doing that? I mean, it's a decision that we make every day, right? And so it's interesting how we pick and choose. Again, that's a part of the complexity of being a human being. So we're turned on a television channel that is anti-black, right? We'll turn on music that's anti-black, radio stations that are anti-black. We'll watch things that are anti-black, and we'll separate it. Right? We do it literally every day. We have these decisions that we make. Are we going to engage or are we not? Just got finished talking about the NFL. We saw what the response was to Damar Hamlin 2 weeks ago when he died on the field. Again, Damar Hamlin died on the football field. And he was brought back to life by CPR in the AED machine. And we saw thoughts and prayers from every direction. Yesterday evening, we saw Russell Gage, football player of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He didn't die on the football field, but he suffered a gruesome injury. What's that gruesome injury? A concussion. He was carted off the field. And as I said in my Instagram post, when I said we had this scathing response to Skip Bayless, but what happened yesterday as Russell Gage was on his way to a hospital to have his spine checked, the band kept playing as the ship sank. The band being the NFL, the game kept going. And so the same people who I saw lamenting Skip Bayless, putting prayers up for Russell Gage, or for Damar Hamlin, I didn't see that same response. I saw Tom Brady is washed. I saw the kicker is shaving points. It's these decisions that we make. We choose what we desire to engage and why. I don't know that sister's background. I don't know what she experienced to why she potentially might be hyper-focused on Dr. King's infidelity with white women. But maybe it's not for me to understand in that context. But as long as she does, and I understand the perspectives that I decide to look at it, it just is what it is. And with that said, that was short. That was a nice little 33 minutes we got popping. So, so until next time, I appreciate you all. Peace.